Hello, I'm General Mike Jackson, and taking my part in this series of conversations on inspiring leadership.
Well, General, thank you very much for being on the series. It's lovely to have you here. So many of the other people we've had on referred to you as someone they found inspiring, occasionally a little bit scary, but certainly very motivational. So lovely to have you on. And the first question really is your journey into leadership from a young man. Tell us a bit about that and who influenced you, because I think your father was quite a key figure. He himself was in the army, and the attitude and the way he brought you up. Do you want to just perhaps tell us a bit about that and your journey into leadership?
Yes, I mean, I was a typical army brat, moved around with the family quite a lot, boarding school. And my father was very perhaps ahead of his time in the way that he allowed me space to try things out for myself, including various journeys on my own at an age when I think eyebrows would be raised very high in today's world. But a 14-year-old hitchhiking solo through parts of Europe, and I think I owe him quite a lot for that.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, father figures make a huge impact. And when you joined the army, you joined the intelligence corps to begin with, because you had a degree in modern languages and Russian, which you were able to use once or twice.
Studies.
Which one was it?
My degree is in Russian studies.
Russian studies. Well, great. And so the intelligence corps were keen to commission you, but you then did an attachment to para, and your head was turned. Tell us about the journey from there onwards into your military career.
Well, yeah, but I mean, even before joining the army, I mean, I was in the CCF at school. I was a school prefect. You start to, quite an early age, start to be given responsibility. But yes, Sandhurst, the intelligence corps, an in-service degree, followed by an infantry attachment. And as you put it, I'm afraid, I was a great disappointment to the intelligence corps, because I decided, as I came towards the end of that 2-year secondment, that this was the sort of soldiering I really wanted, and applied to transfer, which didn't make me the most popular young officer in the intelligence corps, but I got there.
And when you eventually made that change into para, and we swapped stories when I had to make my transition from the Royal Signals into the Green Howards, you eventually did it, having made yourself unpopular as I did. But you joined the parachute regiment at a time of real troubles in Ireland, and found yourself in some pretty horrendous scrapes. Do you want to perhaps talk a bit about that?
Yes, that was after transferring. My 2 years with para, let me see if I can get this right, 66 to 68, 9, something of that order. I then had a year with the intelligence corps, during which I was applying to transfer. And I finally transferred to the parachute regiment in the autumn of 1970, and was posted to para, then one of the resident battalions in Northern Ireland. So there I was, November 70, a year or so after the army went operational in Northern Ireland. And the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah. And what were your learnings from that time? I mean, there's Bloody Sunday, there's Warrenpoint, things like that. Yeah. What do you take away as some of the learnings that you learned as a leader, that is relevant to people who are listening now, because they're being thrown into nothing like you experienced. That's war fighting, but we call it operations. But they're now dealing with all sorts of problems they've never faced before, just as you hadn't faced things like that before.
Well, I remember being pretty shocked because that winter, 70-71, Belfast, which was pretty much our patch, although we were province reserve, but Belfast was approaching anarchy. The breakdown of civil order, the rioting, the shootings, the bombings, etc. And you thought, bloody hell, this is part of the United Kingdom. Well, one gets used to things, and it was a very eventful tour, because in the autumn of, let me get it right, 71 comes internment. That winter, the security situation deteriorates very rapidly. London, Derry, as you choose, is virtually a no-go zone for the security forces. And then, of course, the traumatic events of so-called Bloody Sunday, early in 72. So I think one grew up rather quickly in that environment. And in many ways, that tour was almost an apprenticeship for me, because back I go, let me get this right, 89, am I right? No, sorry, 79, I do beg your pardon. 79, back I go as a company commander, this time Ballykinler, which leads to Warrenpoint, which is pretty traumatic stuff. And then later still, back I go for another, the third 2-year tour as Commander 39 Brigade, responsible for wider Belfast, and at one point right down to South Down, but that changed. So Northern Ireland under my skin.
Yeah.
And two of my 3 children born in Northern Ireland.
Wow.
In parentheses, I've been able to get them Irish passports, so that they remain EU citizens. Whether that goes down well with everybody or not, I don't know, but they think it's a great idea. Not only the children, but the grandchildren.
Yes.
Because the Constitution is very generous about citizenship.
Yes.
So all grandchildren also now have Irish passports.
Yeah. Well,
I get them through Dover or Heathrow with less fuss.
Yes. Yes. Well, I've married into a Donegal family and Bundoran, so I know the area well. But just thinking back to some of the really tough moments that you had, Warrenpoint was grim, but people who weren't there and don't understand about it couldn't understand just how tough it was for you to have experienced what went on. Can you just explain a bit of actually physically what went on at the time and what you experienced when you came to the scene?
Yeah. Well, as I say, I was a company commander working out of Ballykinler, and we always had one company detached under command of the South Armagh Battalion to bolster them up, and it was change round day. And with hindsight, one can say that wasn't terribly clever to do the change rounds by road, but that's what we were doing because there was a shortage of helicopter hours. And the IRA got lucky. They had noticed and worked on the fact that between Newry, where the company base was, and Warrenpoint docks, there was to-age and fro-age. The docks were actually run by the Royal Marine Detachment. And so there was a fairly predictable target. Little did they, I'm sure, think that they would get the best part of a rifle company in their sights, which they did, I'm afraid. And I have to admit, through gritted teeth, it was well planned on their part. The first bomb took out a 4-tonner almost completely. And then cunningly, they had put in the second bomb where they thought the incident control point would be set up, and they got it right. That killed, amongst others, Colonel David Blair, who was then the commanding officer of the on-the-ground battalion, the Queen's Own Highlanders. And myself and my company, we happened to be in Bestbrook Mill at the time, having come in from a 3-4 day operation on the railway line, which runs through South Armagh. And very quickly, the brigade commander, David Thorne, arrived and took charge because the commanding officer, David Blair, was dead. The second in command, typical, was in Hong Kong on a recce for the next arms plot move for the Queen's Own Highlanders. So the battalion, the Queen's Own Highlanders, became headless. And David Thorne, the brigade commander, very rapidly sent for a company commander of the Queen's Own Highlanders from Crossville again, and made him local acting unpaid lieutenant colonel, and said, "You are not commanding until we get the second in command back, Mackenzie." Then he saw me, he said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, we just come in." He said, "Right, get down there and sort it out." So we flew down to the site. The second bomb was 10 minutes gone, I think. And you can imagine the scene was pretty awful. Mayhem, body parts and shock. But there we are, we had to get on with it. And so we did. But it was a raw, very raw moment at the time, and a pretty raw memory even now.
Yeah. I just can't imagine it. And
it was terrific.
Yeah. And people who are not in such situations find it hard to understand, just as my nephew is an intensive care doctor dealing with COVID wards at the moment and seeing lots of people dying there. And it's different, of course, but it's still just as grim. And it was David Hudson who did 4 tours with the SAS, who was on one of the interviews. And as I was saying to you, David and James Bashel and I did airborne training in P Company together. And David talked about his father, who was at Kohima, suffering from PTSD from what he'd seen with the Japanese, the battles there, which were grim. And then on air, he said, and actually, in my tour, I suffered in about 7 years after leaving the army from very bad PTSD from what I'd seen. So I think what you talk about is harrowing, and a lot of people, it stays with them for a long time.
Oh, I've been fortunate. I sleep at night, and there are other incidents too, which are painful to dwell on. But I'm fortunate. If there was ever a chance of PTSD, it has not materialized.
Yeah.
And of course, Warrenpoint, yes, appalling scenes, casualties, but compared to Kohima, compared to Normandy, you've got a Warrenpoint every day.
Yes.
So I don't make too much of that myself, because it doesn't compare to the experiences of World War II soldiers.
No. And one of the interesting things that when we were talking with General Sir Rupert Smith, he was talking about the Gulf and how he'd upset some people in some certain teeth arms. That what's a parachute regiment officer doing commanding an armored division? This is our job. But the parachute regiment has done incredibly well in getting people into the top roles in the army and special forces. What do you think has contributed to, how did they get so many fine officers? I mean, as you know, we discussed, I was a Green Howard. I came from the Royal Signals of the Green Howards, and we had Peter Inge and Richard Dannett and Nick Horton, and we produced an awful lot for one battalion. But from 3 battalions, you've produced some phenomenal officers. What was the secret of the success? What's the secret sauce?
I think the whole sort of atmosphere, the reputation, the short but I would argue valiant history of the regiment, it does attract people. It attracted me. The soldiers are, dare I say, above average. They really are. Most satisfying to be in command of. They're great people. They think, they are self-starters. And I believe that ambience, that relationship, that overall picture does attract, coming through Sandhurst, some of the best of those young cadets.
Yeah.
It's not everybody's cup of tea. And you know, the county regiment, although sadly there aren't many of those, people will say, well, it's all my fault anyway because of the infantry reorganisation, which we may come to. But it does attract some very good young officers who then make their way through the Army's jungle of promotions and all the rest of it.
Yeah. And we've got a number of CEOs and leaders, business leaders listening to this series in 50 countries around the world. What do you think are the lessons that the military learned about, and still does, about finding talented people, developing them, having like airborne training, which I had to go through. I had to pass, and so many didn't get through. What do you think the lesson is for business and business leaders?
Well, I think we can all be very proud of the Army's MS, military secretary system, which I obviously was involved in both as a subject and then in later years as a operator of that system, whereby we have the rigorous annual report, we have the rigor of the promotion and appointment boards. For those who don't know, who may watch this podcast, if that's the right cry, is it? It is, good.
It is.
The promotion board is presented, let us say, in this year, promotion year, you're looking for 4 new brigade commanders. The absolute inside track job of the officer corps seniors. And the board will be presented with a dozen, perhaps, candidates. And their promotion, their annual report books arrive, and you score them. Each of 5 members of the board scores them. And if 2 members are more than 2 marks apart, marks out of 10, half marks are accepted, they get locked in a dark room until they have resolved their differences to within that 2-mark bracket. And then you have an order of merit. It's rigorous. I'm not saying it's infallible. There are times when perhaps somebody gets promoted who really shouldn't have been, and it can be a bit public and you crash and burn, or a good man is missed. And it's to the army's detriment, let alone his personal detriment. But I think on the whole, these are very rare. And pretty much by and large, this rigorous system, because we can't measure performance by profits, for example, or how many widgets are built in this year. It has inevitably a subjective element, but yeah. the process is designed to minimize that element of it.
Yeah.
So I think we've got it pretty good, actually.
Yeah, I think you have. And there's some very fine people. We had our staff college reunion, which is when about a year and a half ago, I started this podcast series because I saw a whole variety of people like John Lorimer and others, and
yes.
and James Bashall particularly, who I'm very fond of. And we just said, let's start the interviews. And I began with the commandant, Paul Nansen, who was a very fine commandant at Sandhurst. And thinking back to sort of Sandhurst, perhaps, and when you were, I don't know, about 18, or you did the in-service degree, what bit of advice, now having gone all the way up to Chief of the General Staff, Chief of the Defence Staff, Tri-Service, looking back...
No, hang on, I was never Chief of the Defence Staff.
All right, Chief of the General Staff, Chief of the General Staff.
Yeah, I didn't catch the selector's eye for...
their MS system was probably sussed you out too early.
Yeah. Right.
But looking back at Sandhurst, what bit of advice would you now give to someone early on in their time as a young officer or as a leader, just starting out in a business, aged 18 to 20? What bit of wisdom and advice, looking back, that you've learned, would you give them?
It's a hell of a question, that, actually.
Yeah.
Because one sort of approach to it is to be rather egotistic, and it's not me to be that. I was what I was. I finished up a junior under officer. So the Sandhurst system clearly thought Jackson had some legs.
Yeah.
But what about me persuaded the Sandhurst process to put me into a JUO slot? I'm always inclined to say, go and ask them.
Yeah.
I mean, Sandhurst is not a bad introduction to the army as a whole because it's competitive. There is an order of merit, academic order of merit. Somebody gets the Sword of Honor, and that sense of the army seeking to get the best out of those who join it starts right there.
Yeah.
Even starts at what I remember as the regular commissions board. It's now Army Officers Selection Board, I think.
Yeah. In fact, we interviewed the president.
Westbury. He starts at Westbury. Some get in, some don't.
Yes.
Judgments are made. And it's always a sensitive area, I think, when one is judging one's fellow men. But it's part and parcel of getting the right people as time goes by into the top leadership.
Yeah, and it is interesting that the amount of time, effort, and money that the armed forces spend on developing their leaders, whereas yes. when I'm working with CEOs, they do have some coaching and they perhaps go on courses and things, but they really don't spend anything like the amount of time or resources to develop their leaders. They often expect them to learn on the job, and the results are often pretty damaging because people are not that good learning on the job necessarily. I don't know what view you have on that.
I would agree. Yes, the army does have that huge advantage of being structured in a way whereby its leadership returns time and time again to the question of leadership. and study. You know, and it starts, to hell with the officers. Let's talk about the soldiers for a moment. Which of, you know, we've all been to soldiers passing out parades, 20 or 30 young men standing tall, being applauded by their family and friends and girlfriends. Which of those young men, now private soldiers, will be a regimental sergeant major in 15, 20 years' time? Which of them and why? And of course, you know, it starts with out of this bunch, 2 out of the whatever, 20, shall we say, are going to be early promotions to Lance Corporal. And then on it goes. This rigorous seeking out of the best we have. For me, it goes to the core of the Army's prowess, if I may boast of it.
Yeah. No, I agree with you, and it really serves us well. And I'm looking, as I work with CEOs and leaders in business, to find ways of building trust, selecting people, looking at who has the talent, and it's a challenge if you haven't got the same rigor and the same structure. Thinking about your own career, would you pick out perhaps a couple of your proudest moments? What would you say they would be in any of the different ranks you had, or in the places you've been? What would be a couple of your proudest moments?
Oh yeah. Well, 2. You asked for 2. Let me see. To be appointed CGS as the professional head of the service you have loved and worked in all your adult life, that's a hell of a thing. It's a hell of a thing. The other proud moment, I'm not sure about pride, but absolutely I had to dig deep into the fundamentals, was the performance at Pristina airport in the Kosovo conflict of '99, where I had to stick my neck out, but I felt I had to.
And this was with General Clark, the American, wasn't it?
Yes.
Do you want to just tell people who don't know the story about it, because I find it fascinating?
It's all in a certain book, chapter 11. I do commend it to still on sale at Amazon, who do a very good deal. So having got the commercial out of the way, it's hard to put into a 2-minute lecturette, but let me do my best. Belgrade had conceded, by which I mean we had an agreement they would withdraw their security forces and in would go KFOR, Kosovo force, mainly comprised of NATO nations. The Russians had been upset all the while. The ties between Russia and Serbia, the Orthodox Church, the Slavs, etc., etc. Moscow was pretty cross that NATO had undertaken military action, and basically they tweaked our nose by moving a relatively small contingent from Bosnia, where they'd been for several years, into Pristina, into Kosovo. Now, General Wesley Clark, who was then Supreme Allied Commander Europe, SACEUR, and also nationally Commander of US Forces Europe, had a fixation, I'm afraid I would put it, that the Russians were trying to partition Kosovo. He described it as rather like the race for Berlin in 1945, a rather grandiose parallel in my view. We hadn't gone there to do that. To do what he wanted would have risked. How big the risk, I have no idea, but it was more than zero. A confrontation or worse between KFOR and that Russian contingent. And when it came down to it, the only country which showed any interest in carrying out the direction to stop the Russians in the end was Britain. France declined, America itself declined. And I thought, no, this is not something that I can in all conscience do. So we had a bit of a row,
yeah,
which cost, because loyalty to one's superior officer is mother's milk, Johnny.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And that went a bit sour, I'm afraid.
What was the consequences for your career? I mean, you did the right thing. We all know.
I was on the phone at one point to London with then CBS General, now Field Marshal Charles Guthrie, and the then Secretary of State, oh golly, I've gone brain dead, Robertson, saying I better resign. I'm failing to carry out an order, so I better. And they said, "Heaven's sake, don't do that." And I went up and made contact with the Russian commander, one General Victor Zavazin, and we, after a slightly frosty start, got on rather well.
It did help you spoke Russian, I suppose.
Da, конечно. He also appreciated what I carried in my map pocket alongside the map, a small flask of that wonderful brown liquid from northern Britain, which hugely.
That's been a key component of your life, is that small flask, hasn't it? It's become your
I enjoy
card.
I do indeed.
Yeah.
I'm quite wrong to deny it.
Yeah, no, that's great. But you have been known as a real a strong leader, a character. What about some of the darkest moments? You talked about Northern Ireland, and you've talked about Kosovo. That was a tough one. But what would be some other things where you've learned some humility, because you didn't get it right? I mean, you got a lot of things right, but what about the lesson for us in getting things wrong and admitting that we got it wrong?
Yes. The assumption that you can walk on water and never ever call it other than straight down the middle is, of course, nonsensical. Human beings are fallible. We are all fallible. And it's why one does need structures and processes to guard against that infallibility. But Pristina was a dark moment because I was refusing to accept the direction of my superior officer.
Yeah.
My superior officer in the NATO chain of command. Of course, I was a NATO officer rather than a Brit, but one can't avoid being a Brit. That's what I was born to and have been all my life. In some ways, I recounted televailing London, and it's a moot point whether I should have done that.
Yeah.
But I could see resignation on the horizon. P45 dangling in the wind. Fortunately, it didn't come to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I had to search the conscience quite hard, which is not a pleasant thing to do when you're up against it. But there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. And have you, during your time when you were serving as an army officer, you're a deep thinking leader as well as a practical take the hill kind of man. Have you compared leadership lessons from the military with leadership lessons from business, and talked with business colleagues and found out their views? I'd just be interested in any thoughts or reflections you had for people who are listening.
Yes.
The lessons that you could take from the military that are very relevant for people in a crisis, a pandemic now, and a recession, and their businesses are going down the tubes, and they don't know what's happening next week. They don't know what happened next year. You know, what's.
One admires those who have to cope with the extraordinary circumstances of the pandemic. And of course, it's not just them, it's the people they employ and their livelihoods and their families. It's a weighty burden. I'm not sure, Jonathan, that I can give great pearls of wisdom regarding the commercial world, because I've never really been that involved. A bit since retiring, yes. And I do some speaking, or I did, remember those days before the bug? They've dried up, surprise. And I'd be asked by some to talk about leadership, and I would. But it was from my perspective. I wasn't trying to tell a CEO how to run his business or a chairman how to run his board, because I think that it's slightly overbearing. If the audience, when I spoke about this, if they felt there was something worth taking away from what I was saying, then win-win all round. And I hope I was able to stir thoughts. But I'm very wary about people who preach, if you know.
I do.
That rather unattractive sense of infallibility, which is a nonsense. We're all fallible.
We certainly are. And I think one of the things that is so very relevant in the military, whether you've been in the military and never in business, is your ability to read the soldiers, read the people around you, read politicians. You had to do that a lot, because obviously I was ADC to your predecessor. I don't know how many before you Peter Inge was, but I was
quite a few.
I was certainly almost sacked twice. But those are hilarious stories. My two predecessors have both been sacked as ADC to CGS. So I think the reason he kept me on was he couldn't fire 3 because it would look bad on him rather than on me. I should have been fired. I was hopeless.
Yeah.
I remember, many.
Field Marshal did have something of a reputation of sort of eating his ADCs before breakfast.
Correct. Both of them were thrown out of the army, poor things, and they were very fine. But the reading of people is a skill that you really needed in your role. And did you read up about it, or just innately you got a sense whether someone was lying to you or whether someone was a fine leader? And did you sometimes misread someone and they sold you a story and they were just not good and you thought they were good? I mean, interesting your reading of human psychology in the military, really.
That's quite a poser. I can't recall an instance other than one, which I'll come to, whereby I thought this chap talking to me is a complete bullshitter. No, because if the army gets it right, you don't get people like that.
Yeah.
Now we've all known some officers who perhaps are a little pleased with themselves over and above their ability. But it's not the same thing. in my views. The one instance was I had to part company with, just before deploying to Kosovo, I had to part company with my MA, military assistant. You know, for those non-military who may watch, generals are given a young up-and-coming lieutenant colonel to make sure that the general stays on the straight and narrow. And one MA I had, it didn't work, and we had to part company. I'm afraid at my instance,
Yeah.
but we were about to deploy, and you didn't want the results of whatever operations you were about to go and do tainted by the fact that bloody stupid general and that splendid young lieutenant colonel of his can't get on. Yeah. I'm afraid in the end of the day, I had to do it for my own mind.
Yeah. No, and I think there was one CEO said to me once, what is it you know about a situation where he had to sack somebody? What is it you know now about them that you'll find out in 6 to 12 months time, but you know it now. You know, be firm in the decision, be kind in how you execute it, and you help them move on.
Well, I hope it was done as gently as possible, but you're quite right. I think I let it go for the best part of a year, and I shouldn't have done.
Yeah.
Rather than have to put the whole system into a flat spin with 10 days to go before deployment, that didn't sort of help much either, and that was my fault. I should have grasped that nettle and realized that the human chemistry of this relationship, which needs to be very intimate, ain't gonna work. But I put it pathetic.
It's good that you did deal with it. I'm just reminded a long time ago when I was serving, a friend of mine was sitting on the sofa somewhere on an operation when you came in with Richard Dannett, my old commanding officer, and the two of you were having quite a heated discussion about something. Unfortunately, you didn't see him. He was on the sofa and he slunk down into a corner while the two of you were having a fantastic, strong words with each other, both respecting each other's different opinions. I don't know if you ever remember that, but
I do remember. I do remember. I hadn't realized there was anybody else in the room.
No, he was very embarrassed about being there and tried to make himself invisible, because when you have two characters like you and Richard Dannett having a strong words with each other, that's not the place to be at all.
But I mean, on occasion you need that. No holds barred discussion. Clears the air. The stakes can get quite high on operations, and you just need to be bloody certain that we're all of one company.
No. Lives are. It's not.
Sometimes does lead to a bit of a ding dong. But it clears the air.
And particularly if people don't hold a grudge afterwards, they respect your opinions and they move on.
Certainly.
And leadership has been your lifeblood. You've been learning about it. You've been practicing it. What do you think makes a good, inspiring leader, or just a good leader if you don't like the word inspiring? What few qualities have you always admired and found serves you well in peacetime and in wartime?
It's always this exam question which leaves me floundering, because again, I wouldn't wish to preach, certainly not about myself. But I think the first thing soldiers look for is that their leader knows what he's on, that he's not a bullshitter, that when he doesn't know, he's honest enough and brave enough, perhaps, to say, sorry, I don't know. soldiers want to know where they are. They want to know what's required of them, and they'll give you their all. But equally well, soldiering is almost by definition an uncertain business, because there's another bugger out there trying to do to you what you want to do to him. So it's dynamic. So I would say the first thing is, you've got to know professionally, you've got to be competent. Don't bullshit. If you don't know, say you don't know. Look after the soldiers as best the circumstances allow. Get the logistics right, which is a huge call. To get it's easy to say, but I think that'll do.
That's pretty. That's excellent. And another thing is delegation and empowerment of people. Airborne initiative, as I was taught, even doing P Company. Some people are very directive. Others give a lot of latitude. You talked about your father letting you go at the age of 14 all the way 200 miles to Brussels, which people wouldn't do today. So you were learning airborne initiative even at that age. What is your experience of how much you delegate and how much you direct?
Thank you. It's a very important dimension to leadership, particularly as you get more senior, particularly in a large organization. The thought you can attend to every last jot and tittle is, of course, a nonsense. You can't, nor should you. You get bogged down. Always remember the battlefield tour, Franco-Prussian War, and I can't remember the name of the French marshal, but he was being defeated at the end of the last battle. And what he did, he gave up his responsibilities as the commander in the field. And he started life as a gunner and was found at the end as number 3 on a French artillery piece, because he tried to do too much himself. And so delegation, Marshall, no, it was nearly there, not to worry. Delegation is key. And you get the best out of people. You tell them what you want done. You tell them what they've got to do it with, but the how is for them. And you can set a context, set an envelope, but let them get on. And you get the delegation right for the senior commander. It means he's got the time and opportunity to think. And if you don't have that, you are jeopardizing, in my view, your ability as that higher level commander. So delegate, and people rise to the occasion.
Yeah.
A clap on the shoulders, well done, costs nothing, but it means a great deal.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic, and we're almost at the end, General. So I just wondered, is there anything unusual that you want to tell people about? They might not know about you as a leader. I mean, anything you've read or anything you've done, or interesting hobbies that people might not know about you? It'd be quite amusing. Anything?
No,
make us
far too personal.
Far too personal.
It's not about me. It's about the theme you've selected here, leadership.
So picking the theme of inspiring leadership, what about any books that you would recommend, or a couple of books that are a really good read and you found have stood the test of time?
What, for a soldier? For a soldier?
For a soldier? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, both the man and the book he wrote, to me, epitomize the very best of British generalship. And that is Bill Slim in Burma and the book he wrote after the war, so poignantly and vividly titled Defeat into Victory.
Yeah.
He was a hell of a man, Bill Slim. In my view, the best British World War II general. Some may not agree, but he turned that round. He turned that campaign round almost by physical presence and willpower. It was a magnificent achievement.
Yeah.
And his relationship with his soldiers. I mean, it's worth just adding a vignette which comes from the book. He's turned the tide. Kohima and I've gone brain dead. Kohima and the two defensive battles.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Now, I've gone brain dead. They've been won. The 14th Army is on the offensive, and he's got breakthrough. He's going very fast indeed. A lot of the supply is by air, so he's pushing his logistic chain a long way and feels that the arithmetic says you can't keep this up, something's got to give. Come to the point, he puts the 14th Army on half rations. Whew. A little while after this, here he is visiting a gunner battery in some jungle clearing. You can imagine 6 25-pounders, I think, as they would have been lined up, gunners stripped to the waist, dripping with sweat. Hang on, boys, come here. Said, well done, thanks for everything you're doing. I'm sorry you're having to do this on half rations. To which Bombardier Jones says, don't you worry about that, sir. Keep the ammunition coming. We'll get you to Rangoon.
Yeah, brilliant.
You can't beat that.
No.
I mean, 3 or was he 4? No, 3-star, I think. So 3-star general, a Lance Bombardier. That sort of conversation, to me, epitomizes fine leadership.
Yeah. And that is a great note to end on. Can I just say, General Sir Mike Jackson, thank you very much for being on the Inspiring Leadership series. It's fabulous having you on. You've been a personal fascination of me, even though I've never served with you. I've always wanted to chat.
Very well.
So thank you very much for being on the series. It's been a real joy.
Well, thanks. Thanks.